Okay, so this presentation is about some basically some longitudinal research that I've been doing at with my own students at the University of York. Um, sorry, I should introduce myself first of all. My name is Dan Jones, and my colleague Xander Lee, who is not present, was also involved in developing this research. Um, so yes, we conducted a survey in 2024 and 2025 of how our students were using AI. And just to give a little bit of context and background on this, so my reason for wanting to look at this really was, I think, like a lot of people, my kind of AI journey started off. I don't know if you've seen this before, the Gartner hype cycle. When ChatGPT came out, you kind of looked at what it could do, and it was seemed like a huge leap compared to many of the things that were released before. Um, and But then when I received my first AI generated literature review, I became a little bit more skeptical, shall we say, because it was really kind of very simplistic. It had kind of one quote per paragraph, one citation per paragraph. The structure was very repetitive, very kind of cliched language. And maybe that was when I entered the trough of disillusionment and became a bit more skeptical about the ability of AI. And on my own kind of personal journey, I suppose I'm now entering the slope of enlightenment, and I'm finding some really useful things to use AI for, and to continue Peter's tradition of openness about AI use. I did use AI to help me develop my graphs for this presentation. I didn't put my data straight into AI and say, make me a graph. But I asked it to teach me how to do graphs on using Python, which I'd never done before. I'd used kind of Excel, but I used AI to kind of teach me how to do something which I couldn't do before, and it was really useful, and I learned something that I probably wouldn't have learned. So I'm really appreciating some of the things that you can do with AI as a learning tool. But you do, as Peter was saying in the previous presentation, you do really have to kind of use AI critically, and you have to want to learn. You have to have that kind of creative curiosity. That's the word. To want to learn. So because of this kind of journey, this kind of motivated me to do some longitudinal research, and at the moment it's very much exploratory. But I wanted to see how students' ideas about AI and their behaviors around AI were developing. So we've only done the first 2 years so far, but it's my intention to continue sending out this survey every year for the next couple of years and see what we find out. So to get to the sort of nitty gritty of the research, um, we the aim of the research was, to investigate the adoption and impact of AI writing tools among students on pathway and pre-sessional programs. And we had 5 main research questions. So we wanted to know what tools they are using, what purposes they're using these tools for, um, what they believe about the ethics of using these tools, um, how they perceive the tool's impact on their learning, and how these behaviors evolve over time. And the methodology, as I said, it was a survey which had multiple choice, Likert, and open-ended questions. We sent it out in August to September of 2024 and 2025 to the students who had just finished their courses and received their marks and their grades were confirmed. And the reason we sent it out at that time was because I didn't want them thinking that this was some kind of sneaky way of finding out whether they committed academic misconduct. So after their grades were confirmed, I thought they would feel more secure about answering a survey like this. In terms of data analysis, well, as you'll see, I use graphs to show the frequency of particular responses. We did some inferential statistics, although the samples are quite small, but yeah, I'll show you that in a few moments. And we asked some open-ended questions. At the moment, to be honest, the qualitative analysis, the open-ended questions I've got in this are, you know, have not been kind of analyzed in a very structured way at the moment, but they do really illustrate some of the findings of the statistical analysis. So just to quickly go over the demographics. So the first cohort was mostly female. The second cohort was 50-50. In terms of level of study, the first cohort was very much mostly postgraduates. You know, they were preparing for postgraduate courses, so they hadn't actually started postgraduate courses yet. And only about 17% were undergraduates preparing for foundation course, doing a foundation course. The number of postgrads has dropped off quite significantly in 2025. Nationality-wise, 2024 was overwhelmingly mainland Chinese. The other nationalities, that, you know, there's a significant number of other East Asian nationalities, and a small proportion that were from other parts of the world. So you can see that we have very East Asian students in our department. The second cohort, the number of Chinese again had dropped off significantly, and I think that's probably you know, links to the number of postgraduates dropping off as well. Yeah, and I should say as well that the overall number of students responding and just the numbers in our department dropped off quite a lot over those 2 years as well. So you know, you can see that the first survey received 53 responses, the second only 28. In terms of the tools that they're using, well, first of all, in terms of generative AI tools, ChatGPT is the overwhelming favorite. 76% in 2024, 90% in 2025 cohort said that they had used ChatGPT. However, some of what we might call the sort of legacy tools, Google Translate and Grammarly, were similarly popular to ChatGPT, especially in 2024. Or you know, Google Translate was even more popular than ChatGPT in 2024. So that's kind of interesting that students were still using those kind of older machine learning tools that were there before ChatGPT. What we see in 2025 is that all of the generative tools have increased, whilst the kind of legacy machine learning tools have decreased, even though, you know, I guess Grammarly and things like that these days have you know, more kind of LLM AI incorporated into it, as do so many pieces of software these days. But these kind of chatbot tools are becoming more popular, it seems, and these kind of single-use tools less so. So what were the students using AI for, and what did they believe about the ethics and the impact on learning? So I'm just taking a sip of my water. So if we look at the uses, we can see that the main things which students are using for AI for are either preparing for writing, with things like brainstorming, generating an outline, generating a first draft, or they're using it for uh, things which come after writing or alongside it, things like giving feedback on content and language, or explaining difficult concepts and new vocabulary. What they report not using it for is generating whole sections of a paper, finished pieces of work. I mean, from this, I mean, something which I find a bit troubling there actually is that they're using it for generating first drafts, because to me, that is one of the things where you really kind of develop your writing skills, is writing a first draft and then developing it into a second draft. I think also, if we look at the beliefs about AI use, the beliefs closely match the behaviors. Perhaps that's not surprising. I think another interesting point, though, is that very often, for most of these use cases, there are more people who believe that it's ethical and that it enhances learning slightly more than actually do it and use it for that purpose. So that's good in a way. That suggests that their ethics, their behavior kind of follows their ethics and their beliefs about learning. One difference there is with translation, where 28% of students are translating it, but only 9% think that it's enhancing their learning. So, that's quite an interesting finding there, I think. So some students, they realize that it would be better to translate things themselves, and they would learn more from it, but they're doing it anyway, presumably for speed and efficiency. So that was the 24 cohort. If we look at the 25 cohort, we see a very similar pattern. There is one, I added summarizing to this year, actually, because for some reason I didn't add it in 2024. As I said, it's exploratory. So we, similar pattern with, things like brainstorming, and preparing to write, generating an outline, being the more, and giving feedback being the more popular uses. More students said that they had used it to generate sections or generate a whole paper than in 2024, but they seem to have recognized that this is neither ethical nor enhancing their learning. So that's quite interesting. But otherwise, I think the pattern is quite similar. So these are some relevant comments which students made about the use cases. And you can see, oh, well, I'll give you a moment to just read those, actually. So I think you can see from the first comment there that the student has, believes that AI can be used for certain purposes, but they're quite critical of its use for more. It sounds like they're critical of its use for more sophisticated tasks, and they actually find that you need to spend more time fixing things that AI has produced than it would take to actually do it yourself. The second comment there, again, it kind of sounds like they're using AI for coming up with ideas, so it aligns with what we found in the statistical analysis. And then but then they're kind of doing more work on top of that themselves to develop the idea fully. So another interesting thing which came out of a few comments, and these, this this isn't something that was necessarily widespread, but these comments kind of jumped out at me was the idea that AI could possibly be used as a tool for inclusion. And this has been cited in other research, which I've read actually. So this, if you look at the comment on the left there, the student has used Grammarly to check their writing because they have dysgraphia and ADHD. Um, and we can envisage a lot of situations where AI, especially as it kind of links up different things like your documents, your calendar, all sorts of things like that, how AI could potentially be really helpful for someone with something like ADHD. Maybe they have difficulty organizing themselves and things like that. AI could be really helpful in that capacity as a sort of personal assistant. Um, so going beyond really just checking spelling or something like that. Um, the second example here, this is a student who says that because they're on a pre-master's course, they didn't use AI to translate. However, maybe if they were doing a course where the content is the focus, um, perhaps it would be acceptable for AI to translate. If they know the content themselves in their own language, does it matter if they don't know it in English? And I think I mean, again, this is not a new debate. This is a debate that's been had, and I think it's something that we need to continue having about whether, um, you know, whether we insist that, students uh, do things in English, or whether we accept a certain amount of translation. Um, so if we look at this graph, students were asked to agree with a series of statements about AI and learning. I mean, the first thing to point out about this is actually like a lot of these proportions are quite stable over the 2 years. So, I mean, if we kind of if we block the uh, strongly agrees and strongly disagrees with the agrees and disagrees, if you look at the first graph there for uh, does AI make it easier for you to get a degree from a UK university? You've got a very similar pattern there from year to year. Same with the second graph about whether it's important to have good English skills. So it's reassuring there that very few students think that it's less important to have good English skills. Um, this was an interesting one. The third one, I may not be able to keep up with my classmates if I don't use AI. It's a relatively small proportion that are concerned about that, but still not insignificant, around, 25%, a quarter of students are concerned that they may not be able to keep up with their classmates. Again, pretty stable through both cohorts. Um, an interesting comparison between the next two is students who are confident that they know how to the vast majority of students in both cohorts are confident that they know how to use AI appropriately. However, still quite a significant proportion, around almost 50, well, about 43% in the first year and um, over 50 in the second year, uh, feel that they need more guidance on using AI. So that kind of is an interesting counterpoint there. So this was an interesting comment which linked to one of the questions there. I try to avoid using AI as much as possible, but I know that many of my classmates use it more than I did, so I was a bit nervous about that. So there's clearly are some students who are concerned that they won't be able to keep up um, if they're not using AI. Um, So finally, because of that question and the kind of interesting response to that question, one of the things which we asked in the 2025 survey was uh, what proportion of students they estimated, what proportion of their classmates they estimated were using AI to cheat on their assignment. Um, and So the majority put it at quite a low percentage. So 33% of respondents thought that it was in the 0 to 20% range. Um, However, that means that the majority of respondents thought that it was more than 20%, which is kind of troubling, really. That kind of it does make you think, and it's it's a larger proportion than that which kind of acknowledged using AI in the graphs that we saw earlier. So it's kind of like obviously that could be to do with sampling bias because it's a voluntary survey. So the students who've signed up to do the survey may just be the ones who use AI in a fairly ethical way. And this quotation, I realize I'm getting short of time now, but this quotation uh, is quite interesting. One of the students talked about the determination of Chinese students to achieve good grades um, using unconventional means, which I think is quite an interesting euphemism. Um, I'm going to skip these slides actually, and just because basically I kind of summarized that in the key findings anyway. So really the key findings from this were ChatGPT is by far the most popular generative AI tool. Grammarly and Google Translate are similarly popular. 2025 saw a decline in Grammarly and Google Translate, but an increase in generative AI tools. In terms of behaviors, the students were using AI mostly to kind of prepare for writing and to polish their writing. However, one of the things that they mentioned in preparation for writing was writing drafts. Quite a lot of students said that they were using AI to do a first draft. So if they're using AI to do a first draft and then using AI to get feedback on their drafts, then how much actual writing of their own are they doing? That's kind of an interesting question to think about. Um, the percentages were quite stable from 2024 to 2025. In terms of ethical beliefs, the ethical beliefs largely track with the behaviors, and as do the beliefs about uh, the impact on learning. And learners generally believe that using AI for final drafts is unethical and undermines learning, and most of them don't do it according to the data. One of the things which I didn't have time to go over there fully is that postgraduates were generally more open to AI use than undergraduates, especially in 2024. And this we tested this with statistical tests, and we found statistically significant differences for quite a number of the questions about use and about beliefs about the impact on learning. Um, and yes, obviously, some of the other interesting findings were the students being concerned about whether it gave others an unfair advantage and the possibilities for inclusivity. Okay, so I think I'll finish there so that there's some time for questions if anyone has any.